Hello and welcome to today's edition of Your Questions Answered with Father Gruner. I'm John Veneri. In this program, we take your questions that you send to us via email. We discuss them. Father Gruner answers them. Please continue to send us your questions. You'll see the email at the bottom of the screen, questions@thefatimacenter.com. Today we have a question about the Church Fathers, and I guess has to do with attaining certitude, as it were. This person writes, somewhere in my reading was a statement, in paraphrase, that if the Church Fathers unanimously agree on an issue of faith or morals, that issue is considered a dogma, even if it has not been defined. Is this true? And if it is, what is the source of this statement?
Well, to answer the question in one word, the answer is yes.
Now, for the overall viewer, let's talk about what is a Church Father?
Well, first of all, for the last Church Father is claimed to be Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. He lived around 1001 or 1100 AD, somewhere in there. But generally speaking, that's I think they're talking more about his style of writing, although I don't want to take anything away from Saint Bernard, of course. But the Church Fathers are generally considered to be the first few hundred years of the Church.
Yeah, I remember hearing St. John Damascene was considered, but that's about the year 700, something like that.
And so he's certainly there. The Church Fathers are saints. Now, there are people like Origen, for example, who never canonized. Not saying he wasn't holy or not in heaven, but he was never canonized. But they would consider him a Church Father because he's an early, but he was certainly an early Church writer. Mm-hmm. And but
he's definitely cited as an authority.
Yes, but certainly he's a witness, no question about it, of what was believed and thought at that time, and who were and as well as his own reflections upon what he knew to be the Catholic faith. But I'm not to say that some would claim him as a father, some would not. But I would say certainly they're a writer. I mean, they could be preachers, but they have to. Someone else gathered their teaching up in a.
We have a record of what they've said.
Yeah. And the second thing is that they're canonized and that they're learned. They're not just. I mean, I'm sure a lot of saints in the first centuries who didn't teach or didn't preach and who didn't write, and they had the same faith, but they're not fathers because they didn't, shall we say, articulate, and they didn't pass it on in the same way. And we can't sort of refer to them. But the point I'm getting at is that the early Church Fathers are those in that. So you have St. Augustine as a father. You've got St. Ambrose,
St. John Chrysostom, St. Jerome.
Yeah, and St. Augustine I think died at 430 AD, and St. Jerome around the same time, if I'm not mistaken. St. Ambrose I think up to 395 AD. But you have early, so they break the fathers down into various categories: the early Church Fathers, and then the later Church Fathers. Anyway, why this is what is the source? So it's easy enough to answer the source. That is Pope Leo XIII, among others. Not to say he's the first one to say it, but if you want to check it out for themselves, they can go back and look up Pope Leo XIII, who died in 1904 or thereabouts, 1903, 1904.
1903, yeah.
And he was a pope for 25 years, but he wrote many encyclicals. Very learned man, very clear expression in his.
Yeah,
in his
very clear writer. Yes.
And in his maybe in more than one place, but he has this encyclical on the interpretation of Scripture, and he cites this rule that and why does it work? But he also doesn't give you the rule. He tells you why it's true, and why it works. And that is that if all the fathers agree on a point, they couldn't have that unanimity if it wasn't taught by the apostles in the first place. Mm-hmm. So whatever is taught by the apostles is what the teaching of Christ, which is it's Catholic dogma. So if all the fathers agree on a certain point, and they agreed on a lot of things, but some things they didn't agree upon. Mm-hmm. But if they all agreed upon a certain point, the only way they could have done that, morally speaking, is because their predecessors got it from their predecessors, who got it from the apostles. And no matter what, whether it was in the Eastern, whether it was learning that in Damascus, or learning that in Rome, or learning that in Gaul or something, or in Northern Africa, they all got this doctrine from the apostles going back. And that's how the only way it could be morally unanimous. And that's why they say if it's unanimous, then it came from the apostles. It came from the apostles is what Christ taught.
I think the term that's often used is the unanimous consensus of the fathers.
That's the term. But that's why it's true. It's not just that we make a rule out of thin air. It's because it's the apostles taught it, and they couldn't have that unanimity, considering all the. I mean, especially today, it's one thing, but back then, I mean, what people were doing from day to day in Damascus wasn't known day to day on what was being taught, but if they all agreed upon it, it's because they got it from their forefathers and who got it from the apostles.
That encyclical, by the way, is called a Providentesimus Deus.
Correct.
November 18th, 1893.
Yes.
Well worth reading.
Yes,
There's
absolutely.
a lot in that encyclical.
Yeah, yes, it's still applicable to this day. I mean, there's been encyclicals since on that by other popes. I think Leo XIII surpasses them.
Yes, yes. So it pays us to become familiar with the Church Fathers. I have a 4-volume set of the Sunday sermons of the Great Fathers.
Yes.
And it's very interesting because very, very much, of course, the sermon. So they're relying on Scripture, but the grace that they were giving to get for the insights that they have are.
Well, some are quite phenomenal. And the other thing, of course, the Church Fathers are easy to read because they are speaking in common. I mean,
A lot of
although
them are sermons. Yes.
Yeah, they're precise in the language, but at the same time, they're speaking for the average person out there to be able to understand them. And so it's you don't have to be maybe in some terminology, in some rare point, you might want to know what that means in the context of that particular father. But overall, you can read them and get and understand what they're saying the first time you read them.
And the older, the pre-Vatican II breviary that you say, it has a lot of the Church Fathers in it as far as commentary.
Well, in fact, you have a passage. Well, every Sunday, you have a gospel passage on Sundays and feast days. It's a short verse or so from it. And you refer to, of course, it's from the reading from the gospel for that day. But then you have a commentary of one of the fathers on that passage and how it's of course then you got St. Thomas getting all these fathers gathered together on the same passage and there's a lot of great wisdom there. I enjoy reading for example, St. Gregory the Great, Pope St. Gregory the Great died 604. He's considered a church father, and his commentaries on the parables are amazing what he draws out of those parables. Very simple, but very very powerful. And so it's both edifying as well as instructive.
Yes, and it focuses on the gospel, which we all need to do more.
Yes.
Yes. So, okay, well, I hope that helps, and we will see you then on the next program. Thank you.